Imagine a courtroom. Normally, people stand before a judge to fight for their lives. They beg for mercy. They beg for money. They beg to be saved from a prison cell. But imagine standing in that sterile room, looking a judge dead in the eye and begging for a legal permit to die. Imagine your body being a prison so horrific, so filled with absolute, unrelenting agony, that the only cure left on this earth is a lethal injection. But you are not fighting the judge. You are fighting the man sitting across the room, your own father, the man who held you as a baby, the man who promised to protect you from the world. Now he is paying thousands of dollars to high-powered lawyers, fighting a vicious, cutthroat legal battle, just to force you to stay alive, to force you to suffer 0.601 days. That is exactly how long Noelia Castillo Ramos was held hostage inside her own rotting body, paralyzed, broken, strapped to a wheelchair, and trapped in a grueling legal war. This was a war between a 25-year-old girl who simply wanted to close her eyes and rest, a desperate father who refused to let go, and powerful religious organizations that decided they had the right to control a body they did not own. This isn't a movie script. This isn't dark fiction. This is a brutal, real-life tragedy that reached its final controversial conclusion just yesterday. This is the story of Noelia, the girl who fought the entire world just for the right to die. To understand why a 25-year-old woman would fight so desperately for her own execution, you have to understand the hell she was living in long before her body broke. She was 25, an age where you are supposed to be in the absolute prime of your life. She should have been walking the vibrant streets of Barcelona, making mistakes, falling in love, building a career, but Noelia's life ended before it even truly began. Since she was 13 years old, Noelia was a prisoner of her own mind. She was diagnosed with severe borderline personality disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. If you don't know what that combination does to a human brain, imagine a siren going off inside your head 24 hours a day. Imagine feeling every negative emotion at 100 times the normal intensity. No peace, no quiet, just a constant, exhausting war against your own thoughts. But even with that, she fought. She tried to live. Until 2022. In 2022, Noelia was placed in a state-run psychiatric facility. A place designed with one single purpose, to keep vulnerable people safe. Instead, it became the site of her ultimate destruction. While inside this facility, under the watch of the state, Noelia was the victim of a brutal gang rape. You don't just recover from that. When a mind that is already fragile is subjected to that level of absolute terror and betrayal, it shatters. The Noelia that existed before that day was gone. Her soul was completely destroyed. Only a hollow, breathing shell remained. Months later, in October of 2022, Noelia decided she had had enough. The therapy wasn't working. The medication was useless against the trauma. She wanted the noise to stop. She wanted eternal darkness. She walked to a fifth-floor window, and she jumped. If life were merciful, that would have been the end of her story. But fate had a much crueler script written for Noelia. She didn't die. She woke up in a sterile hospital room to the blinding fluorescent lights, surrounded by the beeping of monitors. And as she tried to move, she realized a terrifying truth. She couldn't feel her legs. The fall from the fifth floor had completely shattered her spinal cord. She was a paraplegic, but it wasn't just numbness. It was nerve damage. Imagine the feeling of your lower half being constantly electrocuted, set on fire from the inside out. It is a chronic, unrelenting pain that standard painkillers cannot touch. Opiates do nothing. Morphine does nothing. The doctors looked at her charts, looked at her shattered spine, and had to admit a terrifying truth to a 23-year-old girl. There is no hope. Your suffering is severe. It is continuous, and it is completely incurable. Spain is one of the few countries in the world that has legalized euthanasia, the right to die with dignity. But it is not easy to get. You cannot just walk into a hospital and ask to die. You have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that your condition is irreversible and that your suffering is unbearable. For months, Noelia was evaluated by independent doctors, psychiatrists, and legal boards. They looked at her destroyed spine. They looked at her tormented mind. And by mid-2024, the medical board made a historic and heavy decision. They agreed with her, They granted her the medical approval for euthanasia. Just one injection. One peaceful transition to end a decade of absolute hell. She had the date. She was ready to go, and then the door to her hospital room opened. Her father stepped in. When the news of the medical approval hit Noelia's father, it didn't register as mercy. To him, it was a death sentence. It is incredibly easy for us to sit behind a screen and judge him. But we have to put ourselves in his shoes. He wasn't a comic book villain twirling his mustache. He was a deeply terrified, helpless man. He had watched his daughter struggle since she was 13. He had watched the system fail her. And now, his mind completely rejected the reality that he was supposed to just stand back and watch the doctors kill his little girl. He broke. He panicked. And in the absolute peak of his desperate denial, he sought help. He found it in the worst possible place. Enter Abogados Cristianos, the Christian lawyers. This is a highly conservative, incredibly powerful legal organization in Spain. They don't take cases for quiet, personal reasons. They take cases to make public, political statements. When they saw Noelia's father, they didn't see a grieving man. They saw an opportunity. They swooped in, exploiting a broken father's terror under the guise of protecting life. They didn't care about Noelia's pain. They weaponized her tragedy, twisting a dying girl's personal, quiet agony into a massive, grotesque political crusade in the Spanish courts. What followed was a legal circus. The lawyers filed injunction after injunction. They appealed to local judges, then regional judges, then the Supreme Court. They argued that because Noelia had borderline personality disorder, she wasn't of sound mind to choose to die. They argued that her desire for euthanasia was just a symptom of her mental illness, not a rational choice based on her paralyzed, agonizing body. While these men in expensive suits stood in air-conditioned courtrooms debating philosophical definitions of life, Noelia was burning. 601 days. Imagine being pinned to a hospital bed for 601 days. You cannot walk. You cannot run away. You are trapped with the nerve pain tearing through your spine like broken glass. Every single time the lawyers filed a delay, they celebrated a victory for life. But for Noelia, every extra day they won was another day of systemic, government-enforced physical torture. She was a girl screaming in total silence while the world used her body as a political battlefield. Finally, the circus ran out of tricks. The Spanish Supreme Court reviewed the evidence, they reviewed the independent psychiatric evaluations, and they delivered a crushing verdict to the religious organizations and the father. The court ruled that Noelia was completely lucid. She was of sound mind. Her decision was rational. And most importantly, the court declared that forcing this girl to remain trapped in her body against her will was in itself a form of torture. The legal war was over. Noelia had won the right to die. But the most shocking moment of this entire saga didn't come from a judge. It came from Noelia herself, just hours before her death. She had to make a list of who was allowed in the room for her final moments. She banned her father. She banned her family. She gave strict orders to the hospital staff. Keep them out. She shut the door on the people who had tried to force her to live, leaving behind one final, definitive, devastating statement. A father's happiness should not be placed above his daughter's suffering. You have to ask yourself, why? Was this a cold-blooded act of revenge against a selfish father who had prolonged her torture for nearly 2 years? Did she want him to feel the absolute sting of rejection as his final memory of her? Or was it self-preservation? Did she simply want to die in peace? Did she know that if she saw him crying, if she heard him begging her to stay one last time, it might break her resolve? We will never know. Just yesterday, Thursday, March 26th, 2026, in a quiet, sterile medical room in Barcelona, completely isolated from the noise of the lawyers, the flashing cameras of the press, and the cries of her father in the hallway, Noelia finally got her release. The doctors administered the IV. The liquid entered her veins. For the first time since she jumped from that window, the chronic fire in her shattered spine began to fade. The dark, obsessive thoughts that had hunted her every waking minute since she was 13 years old finally went dead silent. She closed her eyes, and the 601-day war was over. Her death leaves behind a massive, uncomfortable shadow. Was euthanasia in this case a legalized crime? as the conservative lawyers claim? Or was it the absolute last drop of mercy available for a girl who had been abandoned by society, abandoned by the state, and ultimately abandoned by her own body? Some people will watch this and see her father as a hero. A man who loved his daughter so intensely that he fought the government and the medical system to keep her breathing until the absolute last second. Others will look at him and see the most selfish human being on earth. A man who was willing to subject his own child to 2 years of unimaginable physical torture simply because he was too weak to face the grief of losing her. I leave you with this question. Look deep inside yourself and answer honestly. What would you do if the person you love most in the world looked you in the eyes and begged you to let them die?